Welcome to dentReviews. Tonight I'm going to be doing something a little bit different here. I'm going to have a special review that is a comparison of what I consider some of the more neutral and sort of studio response earphones that I've heard. This is a wide variety of prices and styles and vendor and companies and just really a lot of earphones to go over here. And instead of trying to pick out every one and do a detailed review, I have these here and I want to compare them and contrast them and give you just kind of a quick overview. I have my computer here. I'll give you some of the specs and some of the details, the prices, and just really give you kind of my recommendation for some different sound signatures and what I think of each one of these. I'm actually just going to go through these in no particular order. It says unscripted, be as it may, good or bad. I just really want to talk about them and have it kind of be a free-flowing review. These are some of the best earphones I've heard again. A lot of them are fairly budget conscious. Now you may think, the price of these is a little bit higher than what you might consider budget, but in terms of the world of earphones, a lot of these are within the $100 to $300 range, which is really not that expensive. A lot of them are in the $100 to $200 range, which is great. Some are much more expensive than that, but I mean, earphones can easily get into the thousands of dollars and, $10. It really just depends on what you're looking for. At this style of earphone where you're trying to get a good frequency response, well made, high quality cables, etc., you're generally going to end up spending at least $100 to $200. So that's kind of where these start here, with one exception, which I'll get into in the review. So here we go. All right. These, first of all, I want to say most of these have been on loan from Super Review, and he's awesome. Check out his channel. He's a funny guy, but he's a really nice guy. He's very generous. He has great reviews on his channel. He does frequency response like I do, measurements on his site. He's got squig.link, I think it is, but you can check that out on his site. And he has a lot of really good earphones. I think we share a fairly similar love for kind of a neutral tonal balance. We do differ in some ways, but we kind of like that general balance of bass, mids, and treble, and what we consider sort of a neutral response. So, some of these, like this one here, the Dunu EST112, he loaned to me. This is the one I'll start it with, I guess. This is the EST112 by Dunu. This thing is not going to focus. Boop. So this is probably one of my all-time favorite all-around earphones. And what I mean by that is the earphone itself is fairly neutral. There's really nothing that it does wrong. It's not going to autofocus here. Autofocus, please. All right, how's that? Is that autofocusing? Boom. All right, let's go. Sorry. So this is a very neutral all-around frequency response. And what it basically has in the response is it has a sort of small dip in the treble region. I'm going to actually bring up the graph here so I can kind of tell you exactly where that is. And you can't see it, but you can just trust me. So the Dunu EST112 has a sort of I call it a dip, in the 3 to 4 kilohertz region. And the 3 to 4 kilohertz region is kind of where the earphone scooping gives it a sense of depth and maybe wideness and a little bit of ambience to the sound, while slightly giving it sort of a darker quality. Now, what's good about these, and I like the way they did this tuning, is that it has an EST driver for the treble. So you have, I think it's a balance armature driver for the mids, I think it's a dynamic driver for the bass, and EST driver for the treble. So you have a nice variety of drivers in there, and they do a really good job of spanning that frequency response. The treble has a nice quality where it's very, very clear and detailed, almost wispy and bright, but that EST driver does a really good job of never sounding fatiguing or harsh. So this is an earphone that is very, very, very resolving, a little bit on the smoother side. It does have a little bit of a bass lift at the very low mid bass, maybe around 100 to 200 hertz. So it has a little bit of warmth, but the treble does a really good job of bringing out the details, and it just balances out really nicely. So what you end up with is something that's comfortable to listen to while still having a very neutral sound. It's not the most lean. It's not Etymotic-like in its leanness, but it's a little bit on the warmer side. But it has a nice neutral overall tone, and it sounds very high quality. There's no flaws in the sound. So I would almost call this the best earphone I've ever heard if you want a safe earphone. Okay, and what I mean by that is you can listen to anything with this earphone, anything at all, and it's going to sound at least very good. Some of the most, you know, awe-inducing things I've ever heard may not come across that way on this, although in some instances the response being warm and soft gives certain songs a really lush and gorgeous sound. So this is the Dunu EST 112. This is a $489. So this is not a cheap IEM. It's got a really nice cable. This, I believe, is the stock cable. So you can see it's got a nice cable design. It's kind of a semi-custom looking small center section right angle Dunu connector that has an interchangeable end piece. It's a really nice earphone. I'm not going to go too much more into that earphone. Needless to say, it's one of my favorites for that style or that signature. I'm just going to grab the next one here. The next one is the, oh my goodness, I don't even know what this is. Let's see. Drum roll, please. This would be the Dunu Zen, I believe. Yes, it is. So this is the Dunu Zen. Does it say it right there? Look at that. It says Zen on it. Just learn how to read, dentReview. Okay, so the Dunu Zen, this one is $700. And I'm just going to come right out and jump to that price because this is probably up there with one of the most expensive earphones I have in this list, which I'll show you in a minute, which is the Moondrop Illumination. So this is really close in price to that. It's got a really nice design. It seems like it's very durable. It seems well built. I like the style. It's comfortable. There's nothing wrong. Both the EST 112 is also very comfortable. What I like about this one in particular is that it has a lot in common with the EST 112, but it doesn't seem to have as much of the lower treble scoop out that the EST 112 has. But it does have, I think, a little bit warmer bass. I'm actually going to pull up the graph here and do a comparison because I'm pretty sure I remember hearing a slightly warmer bassiness. Yeah, it is. It's a little bit more scooped in the mids and lifted in the bass, just a teensy bit. But the scoop out in the 3 to 4 kilohertz is less on the Zen Pro, or sorry, the Zen, not the Pro, the Zen, but maybe a little bit lower in the 6 to 7 kilohertz region. So this is just a little bit like a difference in the treble. Both are very, very similar. In fact, when Mark loaned these to me, I didn't look at any of the ones he had loaned to me, and I did a blind test, and I kind of just gave all my comments and notes to him. We were doing it on a video chat. Kind of as I was listening, I was telling him my remarks, like blindfolded. I'd set them aside and kind of blind fumble into the next one and do the same thing. So I got a lot of impressions without knowing what they were, and I thought this one was very similar to the EST 112. So you can see it's got a similar cable, similar right angle connector, similar earpieces. So it's very similar to the EST 112, a little bit more expensive, or I guess a lot more expensive. But what you're getting is just a slightly different frequency response. Whether you like that frequency response or not, you know, that's kind of a personal preference. The good thing, the thing I like the most about the Zen over the EST 112 is that it's a dynamic driver. And I won't get too much into this right now, but I prefer dynamic drivers over almost any other driver type, especially balanced armatures for many reasons, but the texture, the timbre, and just the realistic quality of the sound, the textural quality, I think is superior on a dynamic driver. And I think that's true even of the Zen versus the EST 112. However, the EST 112 treble almost has a slightly more refined quality up to high, the very high extension. So it's really a trade-off. I think I'd probably be happier with the Zen on the whole because of that timbre I talked about. But really, for the price, the 112 is a very, very steep contender. Very, very good. All right, next. This is the ThieAudio NA2 Plus. I know that's a mouthful, but this is a single dynamic driver by ThieAudio. And if you can see here, this is the style. Very nice. I'm pretty sure this is, in fact, yes, this is the stock cable here. Very simple cable, very clean. It's got a nice little cord lock there. The earpieces have little left and right markers on them, and it's just kind of a nice design. I like it. It's comfortable. It's smooth. It's sleek. It's gray. It's nice. There's also a couple other color variations on some of their earphones. I'm not sure if this one has them, but sometimes you can get translucent colors and sometimes it's gray. But anyways, a nice looking IEM. It's not too heavy, it's comfortable, and this is very, very similar to the Moondrop Illumination, right? Which is an $800 something headphone, but this is $169. Now, the main difference between this and the Moondrop Illumination is really coming down to the treble response. The treble itself is just a little bit more forward on the NF audio, and what I mean by forward is when you look at the Moondrop Illumination graphs, the Moondrop Illumination peaks a little bit at the 4 kilohertz region. It's like a little bump, a little hill, not much, but it's a very nice, very smooth dynamic driver earphone. The NF Audio NA2 Plus is almost the same overall frequency balance, but it's a slight, I mean, ever so slightly more bloomy bass on the graph anyway, and a little bit more peaky at the 4 kilohertz. However, it's more extended past 10 kilohertz and up is extremely linear, and it does a really good job of bringing out air and ambient textures in a recording. In fact, it's so good, I'd call this a highly precise earphone. Everything sounds very precise, very pinpoint, spacious, wide, very clear. The only thing I would say is negative about the response is that slight boost at the 4K and maybe the slight unevenness at the very highest end sometimes lends itself to bringing out flaws in a recording even more than they naturally should be. So tape hiss, harsh cymbals, things like that. These are going to accentuate them just a little bit. I'm talking a little bit. But really, I find that the open quality of the treble of these is almost superior to the Illumination, while the Illumination's overall smooth and clear tone is superior to this. The Illumination has more of a silky, creamy sound. These have a little bit more of a dry and bright sound. So if you like a lean and bright earphone, I think this is one of the best lean and bright neutral responses I've ever heard. This is very, very good. So that's the NA2 Plus. Highly recommend that. That is $170, I believe, which is $170. That's a phenomenal value for that quality. And since I talked about it, I'll talk about the Illumination next. So the Moondrop Illumination, this is my personal set here. I got this incredibly discounted used. I highly recommend if you buy one of these, do not buy it new. The price for this, frankly, after hearing a lot of these other earphones, I have to be honest, the price for the Illumination is simply outrageous. I really think it's unacceptably high. So if you can't get this for like 50% off, I honestly probably wouldn't buy it. This, maybe not 50%, but a good significant discount on this is the only way I'd buy this. The cable's a little bit large on the end. Not large, but I guess long. It's a big piece there. It's kind of a loosely braided cable. Nice centerpiece. The earpieces themselves are very comfortable. They almost look like they wouldn't be, but for me personally, they don't press on any part of my ear in any uncomfortable way. They're kind of blingy and gold, but honestly, it kind of has grown on me. It's a nice, smooth, faceted look. So it's not really like gaudy jewelry as much as it's a nice, shiny, faceted design, which happens to be gold. Anyway, so it's lightweight. It's actually surprisingly light for the metallic build that it is. You can feel the heft, but it's not as heavy as I think even the EST112. So this, like I said, like the NA2 Plus, is a sort of a lean, neutral response. I don't particularly find it lean myself, but I think most people would. This is sort of leaning towards an Etymotic type quality in the bass and treble balance. The treble on this, as I said, is a little bit more boosted at the 4 kilohertz, just a tiny bit, not as much as something like the JVC FDX01. That's a little more, in my opinion, and it comes off as a little more noticeable. This is smoother in the response. I think the largest flaw that I'd say these have is the treble is almost perfect, and I really don't notice it often as I'm listening to music. However, when I'm clinically comparing, it doesn't extend as well past, let's say, 10 to 12 kilohertz. It's there, and it sounds great, and it's probably lends itself to a little bit of the smooth tonal quality, but it's not super airy and bright in the highest registers. But up until the Moondrop Kato, I would probably say this is the single best shallow fit dynamic driver I've ever heard. This is in my top 3 IEMs of all time in terms of sound quality. I very, very highly regard the Illumination. That is a phenomenal, phenomenal set. So in that regard, is it worth the price? Well, maybe. There's much more expensive earphones that are a lot less quality and a lot less neutral response than those. However, Moondrop had to go and release this stupid earphone. Whoops. This is the Moondrop Kato. I think that's how you say it. Kato. This is a very similar design. You can see it even has a similar kind of faceted, almost a little smoother, but faceted design. Very similar shell size and style. Very similar comfort. These are not custom, but these are some other tips that I've found work better, and they actually graph a little bit better in the treble, which I'll talk in more depth about with my Kato review that I do. But for now, I'll just say, even with the stock tips, just this review is kind of referring to these in the stock tip configuration, not these. So with stock tips, the Kato is basically an Illumination, but that lower treble that I talked about and that 4 kilohertz bump are completely eliminated. The upper treble is extended further as well, so you get a lot more upper air and clarity, and the bass is a little bit more than the Illumination, but the curve is very low, so it's a deep bass boost, not really a mid bass boost. So there's no mud added, there's no muffle, there's no masking really. So I would have to say at the time of this review, this is probably overall the best earphone I've ever heard. That's my personal preference. There are lots of traits that all earphones differ with, and some things on other earphones are better than these, and some things on these are better than other earphones. But on the overall sound quality, frequency response, and just general perception that I have of the sound, these are by far the best I've ever heard, in my opinion. The Illumination is superior in how open and maybe lean they sound. I like the leanness of the Illumination more, and they're probably a little bit more silky smooth, which again might be that treble response. However, these bring out more fine detail. They have a more natural lower treble, so they don't sound tonally cold, if you will. They sound just tonally neutral to me. The bass is very firm and a little bit more full, and the transient response and the spatial quality, how things sound in a room when you're listening to a recording of a room and things like that, these are just the most natural. The dynamic driver, single dynamic driver, just gives it a very, very, very realistic texture, and I love that. So for me, the Kato is it. That is absolutely my favorite right now. So the Kato comes in at about, I think, $170, somewhere around that. The Illumination is $800. So I would, without question, recommend the Kato over the Illumination to everybody. The Kato is just going to be so neutral and so close to the Moondrop in its other attributes that the extra expenditure is just not worth it. The Illumination is going to be for very, very particular people that are looking for that exact signature and that exact type of sound. And even then, like I said, overall, I think I personally just prefer the Kato in almost every way. So, next up, and this is a new one that I've recently heard that I absolutely love. This is definitely in my top of the list. These are the Timeless 7 Hertz Timeless. Sorry. So these are basically similar to the Kato in their balance. They have a very neutral bass mid treble balance. There is a slight bit peakiness in the treble, especially at 7 to 8 kilohertz, that I think is going to bother some people more than others. 7 kilohertz for me personally tends to be an area that I actually find most earphones lacking. Like Etymotic, for instance, the Evo, the new earphone, it's great. It's probably one of the best Etymotics overall, and the enhancements they made to the imaging are great. However, I really dislike the dip at 7 kilohertz. It's only a little bit, only a few decibels, but for me, all the Etymotics kind of suffer from that to varying degrees, with the ER4S being my favorite. So this is a little bit the other way. This is a little bit boosted, and I do hear it even myself. However, for me personally, it's very slight. I think some people notice it more, and it has to do with their ear shape and where that resonance is going to fall and how much it's going to amplify that 7 kilohertz, 8 kilohertz peak. So your mileage may vary, but for me personally, these are a great tonality with a little bit of unevenness in the treble. The treble has a little bit of a wonky up and down wavy quality to it, but on the whole, the shape of the treble is very gradual and smooth on the macro level. On the micro level, it's kind of up and down. So what does that do? Well, versus the Kato, these sound a little bit lighter and maybe brighter, which I'd actually say if all things were equal, I would prefer that. However, the Kato is very similar, especially when you get the tips that I added on those, which I'll talk about in that review. They kind of just elevate the upper treble just a little bit. However, these have less clean, I don't know what you'd call it, but the inner space between instruments and between the treble response regions, the little micro nuances in the treble, the Kato is smoother than this. It's more silky, deep, clean. It just sounds like going from the Timeless to the Kato. For me personally, a little bit of mud has been cleared off the 7 Hz, the Timeless. Whereas the Kato just reveals so much small, tiny, transient detail. Now, the Timeless is still very good. In fact, I would argue that it's probably one of the best I've ever heard. It's in the top few of my favorite earphones by far. And it's actually very affordable relative to some of the other ones. This is $220. Now, this is a planar. It's a 14.2 millimeter planar driver, so it's a little bit different. And what I find is, personally, I prefer that more than balanced armatures, but still not as much as dynamic driver. Comes off as a little bit more light and wispy sounding than a dynamic driver, but not as plasticky and whiffy sounding as a balanced armature. And I know these are kind of stupid terms, but for anyone that has any similar perception of dynamic versus balanced armature, they'll probably know what I'm talking about, especially in the bass. The bass of a balanced armature for me sounds kind of like woofy air. A dynamic driver sounds like firm, tight bass, and this is kind of somewhere in between. It's very good bass, maybe just not as firm as something like the Kato. So that is the Timeless. It's very good, and I'd say tonally a little brighter and possibly even more neutral overall than the Kato in its sense of balance between the treble and the mids maybe, but the Kato is so close and has a much more clean, resolving smoothness to it, which I personally think takes it up a notch. And again, if you don't mind adding other tips, adding those dual flange tips that I have increases that treble and brings it close to, if not matching, the Timeless without the peak, actually. So the Kato is even more customizable. So I'll leave that there. Timeless, great offering. Next in line, we have the ThieAudio Yume. All right, so these are an interesting earphone. The ThieAudio Yume, they retail for about $170. It's a single dynamic driver for the bass and 2 balanced armatures for the mids and treble. Now, these personally, these are probably one of the most neutral frequency responses I've ever heard. They're practically flawless. I mean, they're literally the response I would want in an earphone, except not the driver type. And what I mean by that is these are almost better than the Kato. These have the same basic response all the way from 300 Hz up until about 15 kilohertz. So it's almost identical on graph. However, the bass actually has a better shape where it's linear and then rises in the sub bass, whereas the Kato has a little bit more lift in the lower mid bass. But relatively speaking, they both sound neutral and they're very good. However, I'd argue the response on paper anyway is better on these. The problem with these is the balanced armature changes that texture to be a more light and wispy sound rather than the firm, natural, realistic quality that I like in the Kato dynamic driver. But it's much better than most balanced armatures I've heard. I will say that I listened to the ThieAudio Bravery, and that one had such a weird quality to it. It was like the sound was almost weak. It had like a mushiness to it. I really didn't like it, even though the response was pretty good. I think in a very critical sense, I can hear something similar with these, but to be completely frank, when I'm listening to these and I'm not comparing anything, the response is superb, and they bring out an incredible nuanced level of detail in the recordings. And sometimes they make me hear things that I've actually never heard before in a recording, in a good way. But they tend to have that softer quality and that wispy treble and not that dynamic texture that I like. So that really does take them down a pretty big step. However, for the price, $170 or so, they're really not bad value-wise. They're $169. So if you like balanced armature sound, I think those do a great job for balanced armature. They're very linear, very smooth, very resolving, and on the leaner side, but they have a nice deep sub bass that hits low when needed, but it's not by any means a bassy earphone. So I'll leave it there. That's the Yume. The next in line, let's go to the Bravery. Is this the Bravery? No, I don't know what this is. Let's see. This is the, drumroll, dun 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 dun, Kiwi Orchestra. Alright, so we have the Kiwi Orchestra here. This is possibly not the original cable, to be completely honest. I have no idea. This is a loaner, so I'm not really sure. I'm not going to go into that, but it's a nice looking earphone, kind of a semi-custom design. It's very, very comfortable. It's not too heavy. It's a nice cable that it comes with. I don't know if it is stock or not, but it's nice. And the Kiwi Orchestra is another interesting earphone. So with this earphone, I was kind of disappointed. I was expecting a lot more based on the graph. In fact, let me pull that graph up here real quick. So the Kiwi Orchestra sort of has a similar response to something like the Yume or the Kato, but it's a little bit less prominent in the lower treble, between 1 to 6 kilohertz. The entire sort of lower treble curve is kind of like chopped off and more recessed a little bit, a few decibels. The bass on graph anyway is phenomenally linear, probably one of the most linear basses I've ever seen. And it does sound very, very resolving. Even though it might be a little bit on the leaner side, the bass is very good quality, very resolving. The biggest challenge with this, like the other one that I was just reviewing, the Yume, is that this also is not a dynamic driver, which is really disappointing. However, it is 8 balanced armature drivers. Now, 8 drivers you would think would make this thing just sound mind-blowing, right? The more drivers, better. Well, I found that in general that really has nothing to do with sound quality after a certain point. I think drivers, multiple drivers generally should be added so that you can have tuning flexibility. And what I mean by that is, okay, so you have a perfect response, but maybe there's a dip in the treble. Okay, well, you add another driver to fill in that gap, and you kind of cross them over properly so you get a smooth response. Okay, great. Well, it only takes, generally speaking, 3, maybe 4 drivers to do that with any reasonable earphone manufacturer. And these here have 8, and they have that low treble that I don't really like. I like it having that prominence that the Etymotic or the Kato has. So what this comes off sounding like is a subdued, soft lower treble, almost like a pillowy sound, like not muffled per se, but maybe just a little bit more like you're listening to something under a pillow. But then they're boosted in the upper treble from like 8 to 10K, so they have a lot of like extra clarity, but it gives it an uneven sort of scooped out treble sound to a slight degree, very slight. I'd say these are very neutral, and they do come in as a very clean, resolving, very detailed set. In fact, I think they're one of the more detailed oriented sets. But that softer lower treble for me it personally just detracts it too far from that natural ambience and that quality that I like when I'm listening to music. I want it to sound natural in the way it was recorded, and those just come off too soft for me. So anyhow, that is the Kiwi Orchestra. Those orchestras are about $500. Now, if those were cheaper, I would probably be a lot more excited about them, but for $500, I really think there's a lot of competition that kind of just personally blows them out of the water. If that's the response you're looking for and you don't mind the balanced armature quality, and maybe you find that lower treble region problematic and you like it recessed a little bit, hey, maybe that's for you. For me personally, it's just not my taste. Alright, so next we're going to go to the HiFi T2 Plus. These are kind of a cute little earphone. I like the style of these. They're very simple, smooth. They look like something out of Flight of the Navigator. These are a 10 millimeter dynamic driver, so these are my style of dynamic driver. I like the quality of the texture on these. They're very comfortable. They're very lightweight. At first when I picked them up, I thought they were going to be like heavy metal, but they actually come across as feeling probably, I'd say, a little bit more on the side of like a, I don't know, like a plasticky. They just don't feel heavy, but I think they are metal. I don't really know. They look nice. They have color-coded left and right. The sound signature on these is actually kind of similar to the Kiwi Orchestra in one sense, and that is that the lower treble has a very similar shape. However, they're a little bit more smooth in the transient region, and what I mean by that is the Kato, sorry, not the Kato, the Kiwi Orchestra has that sort of upper boost at the 10 to 12 kilohertz region, which for me comes off as a little bit peaky, and that transient sometimes just sounds like it's jumping out a little bit unnaturally. These, not only do they have a better timbre and texture because of the dynamic driver, but they also have a little bit smoother upper treble. So you get a little bit less of that transient peakiness, and things sound a little bit more natural. But they're still, for me personally, a little bit on that softer side in the lower treble, and I'm not a fan of that. However, I do prefer them over the orchestra. Now, these here are about, let's see, $59. So here's the thing. Like the orchestra I was talking about, these are a good value. And even though it's not my perfect response, for the price, I think these are an excellent, excellent response, excellent set. So, there you go with that. Next, this is another personal set of mine. This is the Tanchjim Oxygen. I'm not sure if that's how you say it. But there's the nice faceplate on these. They're kind of a shiny silver. And it's got a nice thin cable, nice cord lock. I really like this cable. It's pretty nice. It's very slim, very small. I like that. It's light. So it wraps up very, very tightly, very compactly. I can wrap this thing up. I'm actually going to show you. Let me show you something. Would you look at that? Just look at it. So these wrap up very small. And I could even get it tighter than that. But anyhow, that is the Oxygen. Now, the Oxygen is a very, very good earphone. In fact, before I had the Kato and some of the other ones here, I would say this was probably what I considered the best overall sound signature. Now, it does have a slight peak at around 12 kilohertz, I believe it is, and that is problematic in some source material. It's not the most, perfectly linear thing on the planet, but what it does really, really well is from the bass to the treble, it's very smooth. In other words, there's no obvious dips or peaks up until maybe that highest treble peak. The only difference between something like the Kato, the Illumination, those things, is that the bass on these is more elevated. So while it is a neutral and smooth response, I'd call it a slightly bass-heavy neutrality. So if you want something with a little bit more oomph underneath it, a little bit maybe warmer, darker quality while still having a very, very smooth and linear and almost perfect lower treble, the Oxygen is the way to go. And these are only, I think, about $180. Or actually, I take that back. Sorry. I think these are $280. Check the prices. Prices fluctuate, but I think these are $280 if I'm not mistaken. They're probably worth it for someone who wants something that has what I would call a heightened sense of imaging. And that peak really up high lends the sound a sort of high def, wide, and precise quality to it. So imaging, things standing out in a unique way, is almost hyped up on those. So they have a very nice kind of sound field, very nice transient imaging. It's great. But they come off at the same time sounding a little bit dark, and a little bit overly bassy maybe. So from a true linearity perspective, something like the Kato is superior, or something like this Timeless is superior. But, in general, I think they're one of the more referenced sets. So take it as it is. I think some people might like that heightened sense of imaging. I know some people do, where I prefer that overly smooth response so that nuances might be more obvious without really jumping out at you. Next in line, we're going to go to the ThieAudio Legacy. This is the Legacy 5. Now, the Legacy 5, I've actually did a review, or I probably will be doing a review of the other Legacies. The Legacy 5 is similar to the Kiwi and the Tin Hi-Fi in that it has that scooped out lower treble, which I'm not a fan of. And on top of that, these are balanced armature. So again, you're kind of having 4 balanced armature and a 1 dynamic driver. You're kind of getting into that bad combination of that response and the driver type for me personally. Now, the quality of these seems to be superior to the Kiwi Orchestra to me. The drivers just sound higher quality. The bass from that dynamic driver is more firm and definitely a nice curve. I like the bass on these a lot. In fact, there's nothing I dislike about these. The overall response is really, really good, and the treble details are very revealing. It's very highly treble extended. It's just the treble shape in the lower treble is just a little bit on that less natural ambience quality thing that I was talking about earlier, and a little bit more towards a softer tone. So these are a very, very neutral response otherwise. It's just not my preferred driver type. But I think if you like balanced armatures and you're looking for something that has a very smooth and forgiving response, having that lower treble dip keeps these from being fatiguing at all. So they're very highly resolving, very detailed with very good imaging, but they're not fatiguing. They're a little bit more on the relaxed side. So for me personally, it's not my style, but if you like that, I think that those are a very great set. And those, I'm going to look here, those are about, I think, a few hundred, let's see. So the Legacy 5 comes in at about $250. So at that price range, I think they're well worth it if you like balanced armatures and that's your style and you want a slightly relaxed yet neutral response. Very, very highly recommended. All right, coming into some of my favorites here. The Etymotic ER2XR. These bad boys are about $100. They retail for about $100 most places. Amazon, Etymotic. These are typical Etymotic. If you're familiar with Etymotic, these are basically your standard fare Etymotic response. The cable is very nice. I like this thin cable. Some people don't like it, but I like it a lot. It's very compact, very tightly windable. It's very nice blue finish on the earpieces, and it's just Etymotic. I mean, it's an Etymotic earphone. So go check out my other reviews if you want to know more about Etymotic. But what's the difference? Well, this is the dynamic driver variant of the Etymotic, and if you know me from what I've been saying, I prefer I prefer dynamic drivers over balanced armatures, and that includes Etymotic's own drivers. So the ER2XR, in my personal opinion, is superior to every other Etymotic in the dynamic driver texture. So that timbre, that quality of the driver, I think is superior in the 2XR. Now, I think that the ER4XR is probably my second best in terms of the bass response being similar to this. This is a little bit better bass curve, but the ER4X comes across as a little more linear overall, I think. So the ER4XR is more linear and maybe more resolving, but this has a better texture and is a lot cheaper. So I think the ER2XR is probably overall a better value and probably one of my favorite IEMs of all time. Now, from a very clinical, strictly speaking, a clinical standpoint, the ER4S, the original, is by far my favorite Etymotic. But at times it's a little bit bass light, and I prefer something like the XR or the 2XR or the 4XR for that bass response. These are just such a great value. You'd be hard-pressed to find something anywhere near the response linearity of this for that price. So that is the Etymotic ER2XR. Next on the line, we have the, this is going to be a mouthful, the BGVP DM8. Okay, so the BVGP DM8, if I can say that. I wasn't super impressed with this. There's no cable on this right now because the one cable that it had was a, what do you call it, the MMCX, and I needed it for the Timeless because the Timeless that I had, it had a balanced cable that I didn't use, so I swapped it. But anyway, so this is the earpiece here. And it's a nice looking earpiece. It's kind of that semi-custom design, and it's comfortable. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's got a slight scoop out in the mids. The treble's a little wavy, and it's got a little bit of that mid-bass hump that I'm not a fan of, kind of like mid-bass bloat. So it's not my preferred response. Despite all of that, it still has a very smooth and there's nothing negative about it. There's no obvious things that stand out as, ooh, that's harsh, or ooh, that's peaky. It's a very relaxed, very easygoing sound. It's just not to the level of resolution or tonal accuracy that I would have. And I'm just going to leave it at that because personally, it was just not my cup of tea. And the thing about these bad boys is that they're $350. For $350, I want a better response than that. Sorry. Not happening. Okay. Next on the line, I'm going to jump over to these here. These are the Fiio, F-I-I-O, Actually, what are these? These are the, my brain is having a fart. These are the Fiio FH3. The Fiio FH3. So these things are phenomenal. I mean, I actually would say these share a lot in common with the Dunu EST 112 in the sense that, and let me explain, the response of these is very, very neutral. It's got a these are some of the best bass I've ever heard. It's not a bassy earphone, but it is actually very, very linear with a scoop up in the sub bass, which is the kind of shape that I like. I like a gradual rise as it approaches the sub bass, and I'm talking like 10, 20 hertz. I want it to lift up to that amount. These do that very well. It's also a nice design. I really like the style. It has a nice faceplate here. Whoop. Kind of like a wavy pattern. It's pretty nice. So, sound quality is superb. It's very forgiving. It's not to the level of low mid treble that I would like in a clinical sense. It's not that Etymotic Moondrop Kato sort of smoothness in that lower treble, but it's very good and it's close to the EST 112 in that it has a lot of upper high treble resolution without being fatiguing. Superb bass. Again, some of the best bass I've ever heard. And there's just kind of a very forgiving lower treble. So what do you end up with? Is you end up with an IEM that you can listen to anything on. I mean, anything sounds good on these. These are definitely up there with the EST 112 in that they could be a more forgiving all-around set that has still a very linear, neutral quality to it. So you get that studio quality kind of aspect, but you're not really sacrificing any qualities of the higher end earphones except maybe that tonal ambient quality that I always talk about. So when you're listening to a recording, right, and you're in a music hall and you're listening to an orchestra, with the right headphones and the right recording being really neutral, you sound like you're in that room. And with a set like the FH3, the Dunu EST 112, things like that, they're very, very close, but they have sort of a softened quality to that lower treble that it just doesn't sound completely convincing that you're in the room with them. So for me personally, that in a critical sense takes you away from that perfect response. However, it's not immediately obvious, and unless you're comparing, your ears adapt and you may not even really notice that, and then what you end up with is an earphone that can listen to practically anything without having any fatiguing qualities or anything like that. So let me see, the FH3 is about, drum roll, boom, if I can find it. So the FH3 retails for $129. So what does that mean? Well, that means in the scope of these earphones, it is by far one of the best values, period. In fact, I'd almost say it's equal to, if not better than the ER2XR, only because most people don't want this deep fitting earphone. They want something that's shallow fit, that's more comfortable, that's a little bit more, just typical earphone. If that's you, then these are probably the best bet. The ER2XR is going to give you better isolation, a little bit better frequency response, but you have to deal with that deep fit kind of thing that Etymotic is known for. So if you like that, cool. If not, something like the FH3 is a great option. So now we're going to get into a few fringe options here. So first, let's go to this. This is the Sony MH755. Now, this is a very inexpensive set. Generally speaking, you can get this for about $10 to $20 most places. This is a recabled set, and the reason it's recabled is because the stock cable is actually very short, and I think it's a J-shaped cable, so it's an uneven left and right. So it's very short. I mean, it's designed to be connected to a Bluetooth amplifier that Sony made, I believe, so it's not a full-length cable. So this is a recabled, it's very nicely recabled, I might add, and what is this? Well, this is basically probably one of the most accurate and best Harman Target earphones that there is, and it's $10. I mean, give me a freaking break. These things are just idiotically good. In fact, they were so good, I had to buy one for myself after hearing these. I went on eBay, I found a company, bought them for $10, and I was expecting $10, $15. I was expecting that they were going to be cheap Chinese fake or whatever. So I did some checking, tried to find the company that had the best reviews and everything. got them, measured them. They were identical to the ones here, and I was very happy about that because, you never know with that eBay stuff. But that just shows that if you know what you're looking for and you're careful in how you review it and you can get a real set, you can get a phenomenally accurate set for less than $20. Now, it is a little bit more towards the Harman target, and personally, I'm not a fan. I'm actually more of a fan of the Moondrop, whatever their VST blah 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 target is. I think their target is superb. It's sort of similar to a critical target. Um, I'd say it's like an Etymotic treble with a little bit more of a Harman bass. And these here have that more Harman style where the treble and the bass are lifted, so the mids get a little bit scooped out, but it's not so drastic that they don't sound bad at all. These sound phenomenal. They bring out a lot of detail. It's a dynamic driver. It's very clean, very clear. It lacks the smooth mid warmth sometimes that is very desirable in some of these other sets. But for a Harman Target earphone, this is literally one of the closest to it for such a phenomenal value. So, without question, no question, zero question, these are the best value on this table, if not some of the best value I've ever heard. For the price is just mind blowing. They're just incredibly good. So if you don't want to spend money, if you're looking for something less than $50 or less than $100 even, I would get these and just be done. The only challenge with these again is that these are not a standard cable, but you could easily get a $5 3.5 extension cable and just connect it to those earphones, and then you have a normal cable. So for like $20 probably at the most, you'd have an awesome Harman Target earphone. I highly recommend that. Last thing we're going to do is real quick is just talk about the Sony WF-1000 M4. I am a user personally of the Apple AirPod Pros, and I love the AirPod Pros in so many ways. There's a few things I do not like about them. The first thing I love about these is the case and the earphones are super durable, super smooth, well designed, attractive. The battery life is mediocre. It's not the best in the industry, but it's not bad. And because the case has another day's worth of charge, it's really not a problem because I'm not going to listen to these for 8 hours in a row. Very rarely, probably. So I just stick them in the case, and next time I use them, they're charged. So it works pretty good. Very compact case. USB-C charging. Not much else to say about it. So these are dynamic drivers, and Apple has phenomenal signal processing. So the microphones and the adjustments that they make to make the response match your ear canal works really well in my opinion. On graph, it's a little bit difficult to get a bass response because it's easy to get a fluctuation because I think it's trying to compensate for the acoustic environment, and it's a little bit harder for it to do that probably in a ear coupler than it is in your actual ear. I don't know, maybe not, but I find that a lot of the measurements, even from the same set, differ in the bass response, where when I listen to them, they don't. So I think that is a measurement difficulty, but not the actual earphone itself. So these, I think, are probably the best overall sound quality of a wireless earphone in the set that I've had. The Galaxy Buds Plus, I had those for a while, and those were very good, a little bit more Harman target, but they had something about the treble that was maybe a little bit hard and harsh sounding, and I couldn't get past that slight irritating quality to the treble, even though on the whole they had a very neutral and good sound. The AirPod Pros take that just to another level in my opinion. They're easy to listen to, they're not fatiguing, but they have incredible resolution and detail. Now, this is just me, and you probably have your own opinions if you're familiar with Bluetooth technology and what you think is audible or not. But for me personally, I'm confident I can hear that these are Bluetooth, and I can hear that it uses Bluetooth compression. That could be partly partly due to the fact that I'm not using these with an Apple device. I'm using these with an Android device. So if I were to listen to these regularly on an iPhone, maybe they would sound better. I don't know. But I'm using a Galaxy Note 9 and a Sony A105 player and a Sony NWZ45 or whatever it is. So A45. So these on the A105 and A45 is my most used players. They sound great. I mean, they're one of the best wireless I've ever heard, but they just don't match a set like the Kato for that perfect, smooth, clean sound. The digital artifacts or compression are just barely there, but they are there. I can tell that it's not an analog signal. On top of that, I can hear the noise canceling whether it's on ambient mode or on noise isolation mode, I can hear the noise canceling quality cause fluctuations in the treble. And that makes sense. I mean, the microphones are picking up ambient noise and trying to counteract all that ambient noise with inverting the frequency response and the phase or whatever. So it's a given, and it's not horrible, but there are times where it makes the treble have a swishy quality, almost like a low quality MP3, and I dislike that. Now, again, that's not unique to these. That's unique to just noise canceling in general. So you can turn that noise canceling off, and I prefer that, but you have to have an Apple device to do that, which is kind of crappy. So I have to plug these into my iPod or iPad to turn that off, and then connect them back to my phone, which is just kind of stupid. Because if I ever want to use the noise canceling again, I have to go back and use the iPad again to turn it off. And there's no setting to override that. You can set the buttons to go off, on, or ambient, whatever. But once you remove that from the iPad and connect it to the Android, it switches between ambient and isolation mode, which is all you get. So, for me personally, that's kind of a bummer. They're a good set. They're awesome in their use. I like the ambient mode because I can use them at work while I'm not, getting distracted by someone that I can't hear coming in my office or whatever. Next on the set is the Sony WF-1000 M4. So these are probably on graph superior to the AirPod Pros for the most part in terms of frequency response. What I find with these is that they're very resolving, and they are very good quality. I really think they are. And they're fairly well built. The case feels a little more plastic, maybe not as durable as the AirPods, but it's not bad. The earpieces themselves are large in appearance, but actually wearing these, I find that they're pretty comfortable. They're not at all like bulky in my ear. Now, the issue I have with these is even more so than the AirPod Pros. I think I can hear either the Bluetooth artifacts, I don't know what it is, but the sound of these comes across as more soft to me. I probably should check this before I say this, but it might be because these are balanced armature. I didn't check that. I don't know what these are. Let's see. These are, it doesn't say, a 6mm driver unit, so I'm going to assume that's dynamic driver. But anyway, so if it is, though, these come across as soft in the transients. They just come across as mushy to me. That's relatively speaking. They're not a mushy, soft set. They're very, very high quality. One of the more neutral responses I've heard, especially in a wireless headset. But they just don't have a firm tactile response like the Kato or the Illumination or something like that. They have sort of a softness. I'm going to guess that it's signal processing in coupled with the fact that it's Bluetooth. And what I mean is they're probably using EQ to smooth out a driver that may not truly be able to handle that perfectly flat response. Couple that with the Bluetooth technology and the transmission codecs and everything, and maybe, I have no idea. Maybe I'm just full of crap. Who knows? But for me personally, I prefer the AirPod Pros in terms of sound. So, let's wrap all this up real quick. What would I recommend for these bad boys? If you're on a budget and you want the cheapest thing but the most bang for your buck and the best quality, without question, Sony MH755. Challenge is finding one that's real. And if you don't know what these sound like, that might be a little bit of a challenge. But if you can find a legitimate pair and you know that they're real, I think those are the best value, bar none. For someone who wants the next step up, I would say the Fiio FH3 is probably the best all-around set, one of not only in the list, but definitely for the price range. The comparative, sides, like the side grade to that would probably be the ER2XR, because this gives you better isolation and a little bit better frequency response, probably a better quality overall, but again at the cost of that deep fit. So those would be kind of the low range options. For the mid tier, or the let's say $200 to $300 range, without question, Moondrop Kato, end of story, period, boom. After that, I would say it's the 7Hz Timeless. That is very, very, very close second for me, but Kato takes the lead in almost every way, Timeless being the second. If you want to spend more money, which I personally wouldn't do because I don't feel that it merits any benefit over the ones I just said, however, the next best and one of my all-time favorites is the Dunu EST 112. I think that if you want something that is simply a relaxing, comfortable listen that's never going to be fatiguing, but is going to bring out a crap ton of detail in a nice, warm, and smooth way, with great imaging, comfortable, well-made, great cable. The EST112 is it. And I do think if that's something you're looking for, it could demand that extra price because it is a phenomenally comfortable, that's the best word I can think of, in fit, in sound, in long-term listening. It's just comfort. So you're going to get comfort and high quality, and you're going to be a really happy person. I love those. I could probably be happy with those as my main set. They're that good. But from a clinically frequency response and overall quality standpoint, I'm glad I found the Kato. I think it's a better value, and it's a dynamic driver all through, better texture. But those are my recommendations. Of all these that I have here, from price low to high, that's kind of how I would go into this. If you have any questions about these, let me know. There's only one last thing I want to talk about, and that is the ThieAudio Yume. And this is true of a lot of headphones, actually. The ThieAudio Yume has a great frequency response, but the treble sounds a little bit soft, let's say. Just a little bit, and it may be a combination of the response and the driver type. Well, that particular driver, if you use one of these impedance adapters, this is a 16 ohm adapter, and I'll have this on a graph on my site shortly, that actually takes that overall treble response and just raises it up just a little bit, just the overall treble, just a little bit. That really sort of clears a slight layer of that treble mud off and makes it a lot more open and clear without really dramatically changing the sound. It's slight, but it's obvious to me. So I think the ThieAudio Yume with about 16, maybe 16 to 30 ohm impedance adapter is the ideal way to listen to that. It just really kind of tweaks that treble and makes it a little bit more natural sounding. However, even so, I think these other models I mentioned kind of outstep that in overall quality of the driver technology and everything else. So I know this is a long video. I just wanted to do a kind of a shootout between all these, and if you guys have any questions at all about them, let me know and I'll try to get back to you with some answers. And as always, thank you guys for watching.